320,000 documents connected to the blaze that killed 72 people back on the 14th of June in 2017. And so far, £150 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on various legal fees. Let's speak now to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's in Kensington for us. And Ellie, clearly a lot of people want answers as to what went wrong and to find out what can be done to prevent such an awful tragedy happening again.
Well, yes, exactly. Good afternoon to you, Mark. And it has been a very heavy, a very emotional morning, listening to the lawyers who are representing the bereaved, the survivors, the residents of Grenfell Tower, which still stands not even 2 miles from where I am now, where 72 people died on the night of the 14th of June 2017. And those lawyers were making their closing statements today in what is phase 2 of this inquiry, which is looking into what caused the fire that night. I just want to bring you some of those statements that were made this morning because they really were very, very moving and very powerful. Ms. Stephanie Barwise, King's Counsel, said that the manufacturers knew that the cladding that was wrapped around Grenfell Tower was highly flammable, and she said that this was clear from internal emails. She also added that one of the biggest failures on the night was that there was no adequate means of escape for disabled people, that disabled people were expected to wait in the stairwells for the fire to be put out. Danny Friedman, King's Counsel, said that Grenfell was a human rights disaster. Grenfell's victims and some of the perpetrators came from all over the world, but he said this was a disaster made in Britain. And finally, let me bring you some comments from Imran Khan, King's Counsel, who said that institutional racism had played a part in the disaster. He described that Grenfell Tower was also known as Moroccan Tower, and he said that 85% of the people that died that night were from minority ethnic backgrounds. And he said the way they were treated before, during and after the fire proved that racism contributed to the loss of those 72 lives. Well, as I said, Mark, there was 2 phases to this inquiry so far. Phase 1, which wrapped in October 2019, that looked at the events of the night, and this phase is focusing on what caused the blaze. But there are still hundreds of people up and down the UK who are still living in unsafe flats that are wrapped in the same sort of cladding that was around Grenfell Tower. And one of those people is Paul Ashvar, and he spoke to me this morning.
I first found out that my building was affected by cladding in December 2 years ago. It ruined Christmas, it's made us all put life on hold, and to be honest, it's been real anxiety since then.
How's it affected you personally?
It's sleepless nights. I think this is the real thing that people forget about cladding. This is a human tragedy as well as one around building and fire safety. Our lives are put on hold. You can't really plan anything for the future. You're worried about living in a dangerous, potentially dangerous building. And of course, this is affecting tens of thousands of people, first-time buyers who've had to work hard and save up hard for their flats in the UK. It shouldn't be this way.
What have you been told by your developers? Is remedial work going to be done?
Our developers have been unfortunately very silent on this matter. They were the ones who caused it, and I believe, and it turns out the government agrees, that they should fix it. The communication has come from our building management company. We were told actually by them that work was going to be started in the summer and potentially completed this year. That hasn't happened at all. The developer is in some respects disputing their culpability, their responsibility, and we're locking horns with them at the moment. But to be honest, they're really dragging their feet. And this is not just a question of money, this is a question of people's safety and people's lives.
Of course, you will be listening very, very closely to the closing statements of the inquiry this week. What do you want to see happen next?
I think there are 2 really, really important things. Number 1, there are still over 100 buildings up and down the UK that have dangerous Grenfell-style cladding, so that's ACM cladding. They have to be sorted out, they have to be made safe as a priority, as an absolute priority. Number 2, we have to get developers to cough up. So many of them have made pledges. Many haven't, including my developer. But pledges are nothing without actual money on the table. What I would like to see Michael Gove do, I think he's taken a big step forward in getting developers to the table, is actually holding them to account when they're not putting money on the table. So if they're not going to pay, if they're not going to cough up, then they shouldn't be getting public sector contracts. And I think that has to be one of the things that comes out of the concluding inquiry today.
Well, that was Paul Ashfar there speaking to me this morning. He is living in a building which is unsafe, which is wrapped in cladding similar to that was around Grenfell Tower. The developers of his block of flats, Southern Housing Group, have said that there is an ongoing programme in place to check the buildings and carry out any work required. But they do say, due to the limited number of qualified people and the demand for these services, that work is taking some time to complete.
And Ellie, given the amount of material and evidence they've had to sift through for this, is it any clear yet when the inquiry is likely to report?
Well, Mark, just to give you a sense of quite how much of a mammoth task this is, there's actually 4 days of closing statements. We've only had one morning so far, so still another 3.5 days to go, just sifting through those 320,000 documents which are being spoken about over these next 4 days. But what we do know is that the errors here are widespread, and it wasn't just the fault of one person or one body, but it was systemic failures across the board. Several companies who fitted the panels knew the fire risks associated with them. The government missed previous opportunities to learn about cladding. There had been a previous fire 8 years prior to Grenfell where 6 people died in a similar set of circumstances. And there was also the fire service, who we're actually going to hear from this afternoon. There was a failure of communication and training on the night as well. There was also that controversial stay put advice where residents were told to stay in their flats. That is going to be brought up this week as well. It's thought that there will be a report next year. It's not yet clear when it will be, but it looks like it will be towards the end of 2023. But for the residents and for the survivors of this Grenfell Tower blaze, they want to see answers, and they don't just want words, which is what we're going to hear so much of this week. They want to see action.
Indeed so.